Good evening and welcome to CYC News for the 6th of November 2016 and the 27th of Beba 17:33 am. I'm Anastasia Attia. In today's headlines, Italy earthquake more than 15,000 people in shelters. Aleppo opposition groups step up offensive. M15 chief, Britain faces growing threat from Russia. Mayor beats budget blues by selling the town hall. Melbourne Cup star jockey Michelle Payne fit again after horror fall. Women's cancer deaths expected to rise 60% by 2030. To our top story, in Italy where more than 15,000 people are being placed in temporary shelters after a powerful earthquake, marking the strongest quake to hit the country in more than 3 decades, jolted central Italy. Dramatic images have emerged from the disaster zone showing villages that appear to be entirely flattened, including historic buildings and churches, crumbling when the quake struck 10 kilometers below the Earth's surface. There have remarkably been no reports of death from the 6.6 magnitude quake, as many of the towns had been evacuated in August after a devastating earthquake which killed almost 300 people, as well as a string of tremors earlier last week. Titi Postiglione, spokeswoman for Italy's Civil Protection Agency, spoke with reports on Monday, claiming that the number of people in temporary shelters was expected to grow as the agency continued to work in affected areas. "We are working under extremely difficult conditions," she said. "The roads were already compromised after the previous quakes, and now they are even worse." The region is still being rattled by frequent aftershocks, which has created a risk of falling debris for rescue workers to contend with. More than 4,000 people have been placed in hotel rooms on the Adriatic coast, while 10,000 are in temporary shelters in the regions of Umbria and Marche. Daniele Gaddi, director of the Holiday Hotel in Porto Sant'Epilodo on the Adriatic coast, said 500 people displaced by the earthquake were staying at the venue, the majority being elderly people and children. People arrived yesterday in very traumatic conditions, but they seem to be doing better now as they are fitting in the place, he said. Gaddi said he had heard that the displaced people could be in these shelters for up to 6 months. More than 1,100 additional people are still in shelters from August's quake in Amatrice, not far from the site of Sunday's tremors. However, the accurate number of people displaced since then is believed to be much higher, as many victims have taken shelter with family or friends. Over to Aleppo, where groups fighting the Syrian regime on Sunday intensified attacks on the government-controlled western section of the city. On Sunday, Jaish al-Fatah, a group that includes rebels and Islamist factions, issues a statement declaring military zones in several neighborhoods throughout western Aleppo. The group advised civilians to stay home or take refuge in basement shelters. At least 38 civilians, including 14 children, were killed in the last 2 days by rebels, with at least another 250 people injured. The rebels allied with jihadist groups on Sunday attempted to expand their foothold of territory on the southwestern outskirts, which they captured on Friday against the regime. In an effort to regain lost territory, regime forces have fought back with intense shelling of opposition positions. Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, or SOHR, a powerful explosion was heard in the western part of the city on Sunday. The Aleppo Media Center said the explosion was caused by a car bomb sent by opposition fighters. SANA, the state-supported Syrian Arab news agency, quoted a military source that claimed on Saturday that the government forces had established full control over the town of Minyan on the southwestern outskirts of Aleppo. The fighting in Aleppo came after the Syrian government and allied Russian forces declared a unilateral ceasefire last week. The declaration brought several days of calm after weeks of intense aerial attack. However, according to local residents, the ceasefire effectively ended on October 23rd, when warplanes resumed bombing in the city. United Nations Emergency Relief Coordinator Stephen O'Brien said the bombing has killed 400 people in Aleppo during October. Now to Britain, where the head of the country's security and counterintelligence agency MI5 has said they are facing a growing threat from covert attempts at destabilization by Russia. Andrew Parker, Director General of MI5, has said in an interview with The Guardian newspaper that the covert threat from foreign countries, most notably Russia, was rising at a time when the threat of radical Islam drew most of the attention. In the first newspaper interview, Parker says Russia was using its whole range of state organs and powers to push its foreign policy abroad in increasingly aggressive ways. involving propaganda, espionage, subversion and cyber attacks. Russia is at work across Europe and in the UK today. It is MI5's job to get in the way of that. Besides Russia's involvement in high-profile activities in the Ukraine and Syria, they are also responsible for high-volume activity out of sight with the cyber threat, Parker said. Russia has been a covert threat for decades. What's different these days is that there are more and more methods available. Parker claimed that Moscow increasingly seems to define itself by opposition to the West and seems to act accordingly. In other news, Alexei Zalivatsky, mayor of Yantani, a small town in the Russian province of Kaliningrad, has taken to Facebook to announce that he has no other option to raise money and is planning to sell his own office. In a lengthy post, Zalivatsky says, "Today is tough, but sitting around doing nothing and taking on more debt is not the answer." He says he refuses to cut social programs, makes promises to repair kindergartens and schools, to spend more on housing and preparations for the upcoming summer tourist season. In sport, Melbourne Cup star jockey Michelle Payne claims to be grateful for her fall. Payne, no stranger to drama, was the first ever female winner of the Melbourne Cup last year. Her choice of words seems out of place considering just 5 months ago she had her stomach trampled on by half a ton of racehorse. 3/4 of Payne's pancreas was severed. The surgeon managed to save it after cutting through layers of muscle to reach it. Her liver was lacerated, and for days she recalls thinking, "I can't go on." However, last year's Melbourne Cup winner has spoken, "It was a blessing in disguise as it breathed life back in. There was no media near me. I got to get back on top of things mentally." So in some ways it was a good thing. It just may have been an extreme way to get to that point. And to our final story, according to a new report from the American Cancer Society, the number of women dying worldwide from cancer is expected to rise to 5.5 million by 2030. Those numbers are an increase of almost 60% from cancer death rates in 2012, when 3.5 million women lost their lives to disease. According to the report presented at the World Cancer Congress in Paris, the biggest leap in deaths from cancer is expected to come from low and middle-income countries. Although women in these countries are living longer, they were also found to be adopting riskier habits such as smoking and poor diets. And that's all for CYC News. A reminder that you can watch this news bulletin again throughout the week on YouTube. I'm Anastasia Atia from the CYC studios in Sydney, Australia. Have a good night.